Good afternoon from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore. Once again, I am Miguel Pangalangan from the ASEF Education Department. Welcome to the 7th session of the ARC8 conference for the handover and closing session. To begin this session, I pass the floor to Ms. Emily De Goldro, Coordinator for the ASEM Education Secretariat, for the closing remarks. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon to all participants to the 8th ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education. Greetings from Brussels. We're pleased to see so many of you taking part in this virtual edition of ARC and to see ASEM countries so well represented. The ASEM Education Secretariat is pleased to welcome ARC8 Outlook Report 2030 on behalf of all ASEM education partners and stakeholders. This report is part of an ongoing effort to put inclusion at the center of the dialogue and echoes the political will of ASEM education ministers to further promote and design inclusive and qualitative education and training systems, as reiterated during the last meeting in Bucharest in 2019. This report is an excellent example of regional collaboration and open exchange of knowledge, expertise, and best practices. It shows that despite a difficult context, busy schedules, and lack of face-to-face interactions, Asian and European experts can join forces to take stock of existing practices and policies and formulate solid and nuanced recommendations. On behalf of the ASEM Education Secretariat, I would like to thank all 25 experts for their personal and professional commitment. I would like to extend our warmest appreciation to the ASEF education team for brilliantly coordinating the whole process and carefully putting together this well-balanced team of seasoned experts and for compiling their inputs to draft this excellent report. While the ARC8 Outlook Report will be officially presented to all ASEM education partners and stakeholders on the 14th and 15th of September, please allow me to come back on some of its key takeaway messages, which perfectly echo and complement the content of the ASEM Education 2030 strategy. As rightly stated in Chapter 1, equitable access and success go hand in hand. Equitable access to higher education of students from all backgrounds can only be a desirable policy goal if it is associated with productive outcomes and success. However, to measure equitable access and success and to identify gaps and inequalities, more data is needed. We welcome in this context the report on ASEM national equity policies in higher education, which constitutes an important step towards more transparency and more information sharing on existing practices and policies, and will hopefully serve as a source of inspiration to develop more targeted measures and indicators to advance equitable access and success of minority and disadvantaged majority learners in higher education in both ASEM regions. Chapter 2 tackles the intensified use of digital technologies, which has been accelerated by the COVID crisis and is likely to remain after the pandemic. It examines the many new possibilities digital technologies bring about to manage, teach, and engage in learning, but also identifies risks associated with them. As emphasized in both the Outlook Report and 2030 ASEM Education Strategy, simply automating traditional practices is never an option, and integrating new technologies in the learning process should only happen after in-depth and careful reflection, planning, and training. The integration of new technologies should never happen at the expense of learners' well-being, learning experience, or students' social and cultural experiences. As highlighted in Chapter 2, access to technology is not only the accessibility of technology and access to information, but also refers to further requirements that are necessary to appreciate digitally enhanced education, such as technical or cognitive skills, the rights to use specific source of information, and access to hardware. As outlined in Chapter 3, the COVID-19 pandemic has raised renewed questions of access and inclusion to international education and internationalized university experiences. We now stand at a critical juncture in the context of international higher education, which allows us to examine the status quo with more attention dedicated to new forms of mobility and exchange, such as virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning. While these new forms of mobility and exchange present interesting and additional complementary avenues for international collaboration, ASEM education experts agree that they will and should never fully replace physical mobility and in-person learning. In this framework, regardless of the type of exchange or mobility, the ASEM education process has a pivotal role to play to further align Asian and European architecture of recognition and quality assurance, to avoid fragmented systems working in silos. By creating zones of trust and greater transparency between frameworks and systems, new possibilities for mobility and exchange should emerge for Asian and European students, staff, and academics. Just like the ASEM Education Strategy 2030, Chapter 4 of ARC8 Outlook report highlights that creating inclusive and flexible lifelong learning pathways for all in the ASEM region implies to recognize the value of all domains of learning, including non-formal, informal, and formal, as well as the full range of citizen learning needs throughout and across all aspects of their lives. This lifelong learning agenda goes beyond work and employment-related policies to recognize the significant impact lifelong learning can have in building societal resilience and transversal skills to help all citizens and learners navigate in increasingly fast-paced and demanding environments and to cope with global challenges. Both documents recognize that cross-sectoral collaboration and partnerships will be instrumental to avoid duplication of efforts, but also to enable smooth transitions between systems and levels. If you allow me, I would like to conclude this short intervention by quoting a passage of the report, which perfectly captures the gist of the publication. Inclusion efforts need to turn away from a one-size-fits-all approach and develop comprehensive context-specific measures. This can be achieved through consistent dialogue, reflection on good practices, and determining areas of improvement in the context of both regions. This will in turn aid in the identification of suitable policies and initiatives that respect regional traditions and approaches while moving the inclusion agenda forward. Augmented regional collaboration and knowledge sharing through coordination of student and expert communities has the potential for more cohesive and aligned policy development, which ultimately benefits both regions. On this note, the ASEM Education Secretariat wishes to thank again the whole ASEF team for the excellent organization, the 25 experts for the insightful input, today's speakers for the inspirational presentation, as well as all participants to the 8th ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education for their active contributions. We wish you all a good afternoon and a nice weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Emily de Geldre, for your kind remarks. Next, I now invite to the floor Mr. David Akrami Flores, Head of the Section Erasmus Plus Policy Support at EAD. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear participants. First of all, I would like to express my apologies on behalf of Director General Susanne Burger from the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, who, due to urgent appointments related to the upcoming German federal election, unfortunately isn't able to deliver the closing remarks at this ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education. My name is David Akrami Flores. I'm Head of Section at the German Academic Exchange Service in charge of German ASEM activities. I'm delighted to speak at a conference that brings together so many different stakeholders: university leaders, students, academics, youth representatives, and policymakers, which are all very relevant for shaping higher education in Asia and Europe. The focus of today's conference, making higher education inclusive and diverse, is a very important issue in order to ensure that higher education is accessible to more people. Granting every person access to quality education is one of the key basics for ensuring that we can achieve gender equality, zero hunger, reduce inequalities, good health, and sustainable cities, to name a few of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to thank ASEF for choosing to make inclusion and diversity in higher education the core topic of this conference. Accommodating the needs of a diverse population, including working adults, non-traditional students, refugees, migrants, and learners with disabilities is a first step to making higher education more equal. We have all observed that COVID-19 pandemic has hampered progress in reducing inequalities in education and access to high-quality education. It put a spotlight on the need for inclusion as a central challenge of our education systems. We consider ARSEF as a key actor fostering dialogue and intercultural exchange between Asia and Europe. It brings Asians and Europeans together. In the ASEM process, we use the term people-to-people connectivity to refer to personal dialogue and exchange between these two regions. The people-to-people connectivity is one of the core elements of the education process. This connection, the personal exchange between our two regions, has seen a downturn due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The use of virtual solutions has nevertheless allowed to organize many activities virtually and to continue the dialogue through online formats. Continuing this collaboration and keeping up the dialogue is particularly important in a time of crisis. Using virtual formats to foster exchange and academic mobility has the potential to enhance collaboration and integrate students and learners in mobility experiences who might otherwise be left out. At the same time, unequal access to the internet and to technological devices, as well as a lack in digital skills, can also lead to the exclusion of learners. Addressing the digital divide, ensuring that learners have access to digital infrastructures and digital devices and possess the skills to navigate in a digital world are hence tasks which need to be addressed in order to ensure that higher education is inclusive. Continuing and deepening the dialogue between Asia and Europe through balanced mobility was introduced as a core priority of the Asian education process in 2011 at the third ASEM Education Ministerial Meeting in Copenhagen, Denmark. 10 years later, it is still a relevant priority as mobility enhances intercultural exchange, collaboration, and the exchange of knowledge. Also, we need more inclusive mobility schemes for higher education. Using the potential of digital and communication tools is certainly one instrument to make international mobility more accessible. Nevertheless, virtual mobility is not the solution to all challenges. Physical mobility is still important for building trust and relations for fostering cultural understanding. Therefore, initiatives to promote inclusive international mobility should consider the opportunities both virtual and physical mobility offer. It was therefore an important signal by the European Union to make social inclusion one of the transversal priorities of the current Erasmus Plus program, the EU's program to support education, training, youth and sport in Europe. The new Erasmus Plus program focuses particularly on people with fewer opportunities, including those with disabilities, educational difficulties, a migrant background, and learners living in remote and rural areas. I'm happy that these main elements were negotiated and agreed upon under the German EU Council presidency end of last year. The new strategy of the ASEM education process, which is currently being drafted, also commits to fostering cooperation between Asia and Europe by boosting inclusive and balanced mobility and exchanges. The new ASEM education strategy shall be adopted by the ASEM Ministers of Education in December 2021. The senior officials of the ASEM Ministries of Education and its stakeholders organizations will meet next week on the 14th and the 15th of September in order to prepare the upcoming ministerial meeting. I would like to express a special thank you to Mr. Anik Lautamatas, the Minister of Higher Education, Science, Research and Innovation of Thailand, and the Ministry of Education of Thailand for hosting the ministerial meeting in December. I'm really looking forward to hosting the meeting together with the Federal Ministry virtually from Berlin to reflect together with the senior officials on the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and to discuss the new strategy and hence the priorities we will set for the future of our cooperation. If our ministers of education adapt the new strategy, inclusive mobility and exchanges will certainly be one of these priorities. I would like to thank ASEF again for their invitation and for their important work in connecting Asians and Europeans. Through people-to-people connectivity, the ASEM education process drives forward the objectives of the Asia-Europe meeting, namely promoting mutual understanding and fostering equal partnerships. Thank you to all participants for your attention and your interest and commitment in connecting Asia and Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for the very inspiring words and for your message. Lastly, allow me to give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Ani Lau Tamatat, Minister of the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Research and Innovation of Thailand. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to be among you today at the 8th ARC8 Regional Conference on Higher Education, Outlook 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe. My appreciation to the Asia-Europe Foundation for organizing the conference and to the contribution of the ASEM partners and stakeholders to make this event fruitful. The ASEM education process has long recognized the significance of the 2030 Global Sustainable Development Agenda, firmly captured in Sustainable Development Goal 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Not only does the process address on higher education, but it also offers specific projects and initiatives to foster understanding and cooperation in this area in the Asia and Europe region. In addition, the 4 priorities and 2 themes accentuated in the process for policy directions and strategy implementations have evidently contributed to the prosperity, resilience, and sustainability in both regions. Since Thailand recognizes the importance of graduate employability and allow it to embrace changes and reap the benefits from the globalization, we have actively taken part in the activities of the ASEM education initiatives. These include the ASEM Duo Fellowship Program, a balanced exchange of university students between Asia and Europe, and the ASEM Work Placement Program, an exchange of interns between our regions, which does not only benefit students, but also benefit industry and business by gaining latest insights and deepening partnerships through the placement of international students. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 crisis facing the world has drastically changed the education landscape almost entirely. Significant progress long built has now slowed, stagnated, and even reversed. More importantly, so is that higher education has become the increasingly less diverse and less inclusive. This calls for more decisive and effective actions by both regional and interregional communities to mitigate these critical issues and to ensure a stronger and sustained post-pandemic recovery. As the pandemic continues to exacerbate, this conference comes at a good time for partners and stakeholders to discuss key issues fronting higher education and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, as well as to place the inclusion and diversity firmly on the higher education agenda of national governments. Solving these problems in times of crisis, to be sure, requires both knowledge and innovation. With the 2030 outlook readily available, I'm confident that it will pave the way for our bright future and be a roadmap that facilitates a sustainable cooperation in higher education towards a common vision for Asia and Europe, and most importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals. In this coming December, Thailand will host the 8th ASEM Education Ministers meeting, which will be an important opportunity for all ASEM ministers of education and policy makers to discuss initiatives and potential education collaboration in order to further strengthening regional connectivity and sustainability agenda between Asia and Europe. The highlights will include the endorsement of the ASEM Education Strategy 2030 and the presentation of the Action Plan 2030 to implement the Strategy 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, it is no exaggeration to say that the work done by the Asia-Europe meeting and the Asia-Europe Foundation makes a difference at every level, from an individual to a global scale. It is my sincere belief that our long-standing regional and inter-regional education collaboration will continue in years to come. In conclusion, I wish to take this opportunity to express, on behalf of the Thai government, our deepest gratitude to the Asia-Europe Foundation for the continued cooperation rendered in the organization of today's conference. Your active participation has truly enriched this gathering. Our sincere appreciation also goes to all ASEM partners and stakeholders for your valuable contribution towards this conference. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind remarks and inspiring words, Your Excellency. This is very exciting, and we look forward to the ASEM Education Strategy and Action Plan. And of course, we thank the Thai government for all the support. Lastly, for all the participants who wish to earn a certificate of attendance, the last ARC8 letter, the last letter for the ARC8 anagram is the letter E, E for education. So please do collect these letters and submit this to us in our evaluation form, which will be sent to you shortly after the conference. Once you submit all of the letters, you will qualify for a certificate of attendance. We also want to thank all of the participants for your active participation throughout this entire conference. Thank you very much. Your questions were very engaging. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved in ARC8 and everyone who contributed in making this conference come to fruition, most especially the ARC8 experts who have stayed with us and worked diligently in the past months developing the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030. And of course, allow me to take this opportunity to thank the entire ASEF team. I may be here now, but there's an entire team working throughout this conference and prior to this. Specifically, Leonie, Rekha, Freya, Angie, Jyoti, James, Michael, Quentin, and Ayn. So we are quite a few working for this conference, among other initiatives of ASEF. Once more, we thank you for your time, and thank you.